I only care about you. Mara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But your family will never accept me. They'll never see me as anything more than a burden. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. Then I'll leave them. I'll leave it all behind if it means being with you. Mara's heart shattered at his words. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to this love, to him. But fear held her back. They'll destroy you, she whispered. They can try, Daniel said, his voice firm. But they won't win. Mara trembled in his arms, the warmth of his touch melting her defenses. Slowly she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first. But as their emotions poured out, it deepened, filled with all the love and longing they had kept hidden. For that moment, the world disappeared. There was no Rain, no Edith, no past, only them. When they finally pulled away, Mara rested her forehead against Daniel's. I'm scared. I am too, Daniel admitted. But we'll face it together. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Edith paced furiously. Her plan to separate Mara and Daniel had failed, and she wasn't done yet. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. Mr. Reynolds? Yes, this is Edith Bennett. We need to talk about your son, and the girl he's fallen for. The rain continued to fall as Mara and Daniel stood beneath the old oak tree, lost in each other's embrace. For the first time in years, Mara felt truly seen. But as much as her heart longed to hold on to this moment, fear lingered in the back of her mind. Daniel, she whispered, pulling away slightly. Your family, they won't let this happen. Daniel's jaw clenched. Let them try. Mara shook her head. Your father, he's powerful, isn't he? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. Yes, my father controls most of our family's business. He's strict, traditional, and ruthless when it comes to protecting the family's reputation. But I'm not afraid of him. Mara placed her hand on his chest. I am. I don't want you to lose everything because of me. Daniel took her hand, pressing it against his heart. You are everything to me, Mara. Don't you understand? None of the money, power, or status matters if I don't have you. Her tears mixed with the rain as she searched his eyes, seeing nothing but truth and love. Slowly she nodded. Okay, we'll face them together. Meanwhile, at the Reynolds estate, Daniel's father, Mr. Philip Reynolds, sat in his grand office, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was a man of power and influence, feared by many and loved by few. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Come in. Edith stepped inside, her expression smug. Philip, we need to talk. Philip raised an eyebrow. Edith Bennett. I didn't expect to see you tonight. I'm here about your son. Philip leaned back in his chair. What about Daniel? Edith's smile widened. He's fallen for a girl. A servant. Philip's expression darkened. A servant? Yes, Edith said, sitting across from him. Her name is Mara. She's been living in our house for years. I've tried to keep them apart, but Daniel is stubborn. Philip set his glass down, his eyes cold. Where is this girl now? With Daniel, Edith said. And if you don't act fast, he'll ruin everything your family has built. Philip stood, adjusting his suit. Not if I have anything to say about it. Later that night, Mara sat in her room, staring out the window. Her heart was still racing from her conversation with Daniel, but a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Mara. She opened the door to find Daniel standing there, his hair still damp from the rain. Daniel, she whispered. What are you doing here? I couldn't stay away, he said, stepping inside. Mara shut the door behind him, her heart pounding. If anyone sees you. I don't care, Daniel said, taking her hands. I needed to see you. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Mara's breath caught as he pulled her closer, his gaze intense. Daniel. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was slow, tender, filled with all the emotions they couldn't put into words. Mara melted into his embrace, her fears slipping away. But as the kiss deepened, a sudden loud knock on the door made them both jump. Mara, open this door. Aunt Edith's voice rang out, cold and furious. Panic set in as Mara and Daniel exchanged a terrified look. What do we do? Mara whispered. Daniel straightened, determination in his eyes. We face her together. The knock at Mara's door grew louder. Mara, open this door right now. Edith's voice thundered, shaking the walls. Mara's heart pounded as Daniel grabbed her hand. Stay calm, he whispered. We'll handle this. Mara nodded, though fear trembled in her chest. Daniel opened the door, and Edith stormed in, her face twisted with fury. "What is this?" she hissed. "Daniel, do you realize what you're doing? Your father will hear about this." "I don't care," Daniel said coldly. "I love her, and nothing you say will change that." Edith laughed bitterly. "Love? You think love will protect you from the consequences of this foolishness? Your father will never allow you to ruin our family name over a servant." Mara flinched at the word servant. But Daniel stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not ashamed of her," Daniel said. "And I won't let anyone, not you, not my father, tell me who I can love." Edith's eyes narrowed. "Then you're a fool." Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Mara's stomach dropped as Philip Reynolds entered the room, his presence commanding and intimidating. "Daniel," Philip said, his voice calm but cold. "Is this true?" Daniel straightened. "Yes, father. I love Mara." Philip's gaze shifted to Mara, his eyes hard and calculating. "So, you're the girl who's caused all this trouble." Mara lowered her gaze, shame washing over her. "I didn't mean to." "Silence," Philip cut her off. "I don't want to hear excuses." Daniel stepped in front of Mara, shielding her. "Don't speak to her like that." Philip's lips curled into a smirk. "You've always been soft, Daniel. But I never thought you'd stoop this low." Daniel's fists clenched. "She's not beneath me. And you'll respect her." Philip chuckled darkly. "Respect? Do you even know who she is? Her family stole from us. Her parents died running from their crimes." Mara gasped, tears filling her eyes. "That's not true." Philip raised an eyebrow. "Oh, isn't it? You think I don't know everything about you? Your parents betrayed me, and now you're here trying to steal my son." Mara's world spun. The accusations felt like daggers to her heart. "That's enough," Daniel said, his voice shaking with anger. "I don't care about the past. I care about Mara. And if you can't accept that, then I'll walk away from this family." Philip's expression darkened. "You would give up everything for her?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Yes." Silence hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. Philip's gaze shifted to Mara. "Do you love my son?" Mara's heart ached as she met his cold eyes. "Yes." "And would you let him throw away his future for you?" Philip asked. Mara's lips trembled. "I never wanted that." "But it's happening," Philip said sharply. "And if you truly love him, you'll walk away." Mara froze, tears streaming down her face. She glanced at Daniel, her heart shattering. "I can't," she whispered. "Mara, don't," Daniel began. "I can't let you lose everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you too much to be the reason you lose your family. Mara, please." But Mara pulled away, tears falling freely. "I'm sorry." With one final, heartbreaking look, Mara turned and ran, leaving Daniel behind. Mara ran through the streets, her tears blending with the rain. Her chest heaved with sobs as Philip's words echoed in her mind. "Do you love my son? Then walk away." She couldn't let Daniel lose his family, his fortune, his future. Not for her. But leaving him felt like ripping her own heart out. She reached a quiet alley and collapsed against the wall, pressing a hand to her chest. The pain was unbearable. "God," she whispered through her tears, "why does love hurt so much?" Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Daniel stood frozen, his heart shattered. "She's gone," Edith said smugly. "She made the right choice." Daniel's fists clenched. "You think you've won?" Edith exchanged a glance with Philip, who remained calm. "We did what needed to be done." "No," Daniel said firmly. "This isn't over." He stormed out, ignoring his father's voice calling after him. He had to find Mara. He wouldn't let her go without a fight. Daniel searched the streets for hours, calling Mara's name, but she was nowhere to be found. Desperation clawed at him. He finally stopped at a small church, collapsing on the steps. The weight of everything crashed down on him. "Mara," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please come back." A gentle hand touched his shoulder. It was the priest. "Are you looking for someone, my son?" Daniel nodded, his voice breaking. "The woman I love, she's gone." The priest smiled kindly. "Sometimes, love takes us on painful paths. But true love always finds its way." Daniel wiped his tears, hope flickering in his chest. He wouldn't give up. The next morning, Daniel returned home, exhausted but determined. As he entered his room, he noticed an envelope on his desk. It was a letter from Mara. His hands trembled as he opened it. Mara's letter. "Daniel, I love you more than words can say. But love is also sacrifice. I can't let you lose your family for me. You deserve a life free from pain and conflict. I will always cherish our moments together, but I must let you go. Please don't search for me. Goodbye. Mara. Daniel's heart shattered as he read the words. No, he whispered. I won't let this be the end. Philip entered Daniel's room, watching his son with a stern expression. She made her choice, Daniel. Daniel crumpled the letter in his fist. You forced her to. I did what's best for you, Philip said coldly. That girl would have ruined your life. Daniel's gaze hardened. You don't understand love, do you? You think everything is about power and money. Philip's expression didn't change. Love doesn't build empires, son. It destroys them. Daniel stood tall. Then I don't want your empire. Philip's eyes narrowed. If you leave this family for her, you'll lose everything. Daniel's voice was steady. I'd rather lose everything than live without her. Weeks passed. Mara tried to rebuild her life, but every day felt hollow. She missed Daniel with every breath. One evening, as she walked through the park, she heard a familiar voice. Mara. She turned, her heart stopping. Daniel stood there, soaked from the rain, his eyes filled with love and determination. You came back, she whispered. I never stopped looking for you, Daniel said, stepping closer. I told you, I'm not going anywhere. Mara's tears fell as she ran into his arms. I thought I lost you. You'll never lose me, Daniel whispered, holding her tight. We'll face everything together. Their lips met in a kiss, filled with all the love, pain, and hope they had carried in their hearts. The world faded away, leaving only them. The days following their reunion were filled with quiet moments of love and healing. Daniel rented a small apartment for them to start a new life together, away from his controlling family. Mara sat by the window one evening, watching the sunset. Daniel walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. Mara leaned into him, a soft smile playing on her lips. Us. Our future. Daniel kissed her cheek. Our future is whatever we make it. Mara turned to face him. Do you regret leaving your family? Daniel shook his head. Never. You're my family now. But happiness never comes without challenges. One day, Mara returned home to find Daniel pacing the living room, a letter in his hand. His face was tense. What's wrong? Mara asked, concern in her voice. Daniel handed her the letter. It's from my father. Mara's heart sank as she read the letter. Philip's letter. Daniel, I warned you about that girl. You've made your choice, but there are consequences. Don't think you can walk away from this family so easily. If you continue with her, I'll make sure you both suffer. Philip Reynolds. Mara's hands trembled. He won't stop, will he? Daniel took her hands, his eyes fierce. Let him try. I won't let anyone tear us apart. But deep down, Mara knew that Philip Reynolds was a man who didn't make empty threats. Determined to protect their love, Daniel and Mara decided to marry in secret. On a quiet morning, they stood in a small chapel, exchanging vows with only the priest and a few witnesses present. As Daniel slipped the ring onto Mara's finger, tears filled her eyes. I never thought I'd have this. You deserve everything, Daniel whispered. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Their kiss sealed their vows, a promise of forever. But not everyone was happy about their marriage. Unknown to them, Edith had been watching from the shadows. Furious, she reported the wedding to Philip. They're married now, Edith spat. And if you don't act fast, Daniel will never come back. Philip's eyes darkened. We'll see about that. Days later, Mara and Daniel were sitting in their cozy apartment when a knock sounded at the door. Mara opened it to find two men in suits. We're here to serve eviction papers. Daniel stepped forward, his face hardening. What is this? The man handed him the papers. Your father owns this building. You have 24 hours to vacate. Mara's heart sank. He's trying to destroy us. Daniel took her hand. Let him. We'll keep fighting. The pressure from Philip's relentless attacks began to wear on them. One evening, Mara sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face. Daniel, maybe your father's right. Maybe I'm not good enough for you. Daniel knelt in front of her, taking her hands. Don't ever say that. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. But we've lost everything, Mara sobbed. And it's my fault. Daniel pulled her into his arms. We still have each other. That's all that matters. Unbeknownst to them, Philip had been watching from afar. One day, he saw Mara giving her last bit of money to a homeless man. Her kindness touched something in him. A memory of the man he used to be before wealth hardened his heart. Philip began to reconsider his actions. Philip visited the chapel where Mara and Daniel had married. He knelt at the altar, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. I've made mistakes, he whispered, but I want to make things right. One morning, Mara and Daniel were surprised to find Philip standing at their door. Father, Daniel said, shocked. Philip nodded. May I come in? Mara glanced at Daniel, unsure. But Daniel nodded. Philip sat down, looking at Mara. I've been wrong about you. I see now that you're the reason my son is happy. Mara blinked back tears. All I've ever wanted was for us to be happy. Philip sighed. I can't undo the past. But I want to try to make amends. Months later, Daniel and Mara stood in the garden of their new home, a gift from Philip. The sun shone brightly as they renewed their vows, surrounded by family and friends. As they kissed, Mara whispered, I never thought I'd have this. Daniel smiled. We've been through so much. But love, our love, is stronger than anything. Mara nodded, tears in her eyes. A love beyond words. And as they danced beneath the stars, their hearts were filled with hope for the future. The days that followed their wedding were filled with joy and peace. Daniel and Mara had built a life from love. Not wealth, not power, but love that grew stronger with each passing day. Their home wasn't a mansion, but a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers. It was cozy, filled with laughter, kindness, and promises whispered late at night. Every morning, Daniel would wake up before Mara, leaving soft kisses on her forehead before preparing breakfast. Good morning, my love, he would say as Mara opened her eyes, still sleepy. Mara smiled every time. Good morning. Little things that mattered. Their love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the little things. Daniel would bring Mara flowers from the garden, slipping one into her hair as she blushed. Mara would write him letters, even though they lived under the same roof. Each letter was folded carefully and left in places Daniel would find them. On his pillow, on the kitchen counter, even in his jacket pocket. One letter read, I never knew love could be so simple, so beautiful. Thank you for choosing me every day. And every time Daniel found a letter, his heart would swell with love. But life wasn't without its challenges. Daniel struggled at first to adjust to life away from his family's fortune. He had grown up with luxury, and now he had to work hard to make a living. But he never once complained. One night, as they sat by the fireplace, Daniel sighed. Do you ever wish we had more? Mara placed her hand on his. We have everything we need. We have love. Daniel smiled, pulling her close. You're right. I don't need anything else. But Mara saw the weight he carried. She knew he missed his father despite everything. One morning, a letter arrived for Daniel. It was from his father, Philip Reynolds. Daniel hesitated before opening it. Mara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You don't have to read it if you're not ready. But Daniel opened it. Letter from Philip. Daniel, I've made mistakes. I let pride and power blind me. But I want to make things right. If you can forgive me, I would like to see you. And meet Mara. Love, Father. Tears filled Daniel's eyes as he handed the letter to Mara. What will you do? Mara asked softly. Daniel took her hand. We'll see him. Together. 5. Meeting the past. When they arrived at the Reynolds estate, Philip was waiting by the door. He looked older, his once proud demeanor softened by time and regret. Mara, he said, stepping forward. I've heard so much about you. Mara smiled gently. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Reynolds. Philip shook his head. Call me Philip. As they sat in the grand living room, Philip looked at his son. You chose love over everything. And I respect that. I was wrong to try and tear you apart. Daniel nodded. Thank you for seeing that. Philip turned to Mara. And you've made my son a better man. For that, I'm grateful. Meanwhile, Aunt Edith faced the consequences of her actions. Her schemes to control Daniel and destroy Mara had been exposed. The townspeople, once charmed by her wealth and influence, turned their backs on her. She lived alone in the grand mansion, her days filled with silence and regret. One day, as she sat by the window, she saw Daniel and Mara walking hand in hand through town, their love evident in every glance and touch. Tears filled her eyes. I was wrong, she whispered. I thought power mattered, but it was love all along. But by then, it was too late for her. Years passed, and Daniel and Mara's love only grew stronger. One sunny afternoon, they sat in their garden under the oak tree, the same tree where they first spoke of fate. Mara rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. Do you believe in fate, Daniel? Daniel smiled, kissing her forehead. I believe in us. They looked out at the garden they had planted together. Flowers bloomed in every color, a symbol of their love. a love that had weathered storms and stood the test of time. Daniel squeezed Mara's hand. This is our life, our love, and it's beyond words. Mara closed her eyes, savoring the moment. It's more than I ever dreamed. And as the sun set behind them, their hearts remained filled with hope. Not just for the future, but for every moment they had yet to share. Because true love never ends.